Hi everyone, welcome to today's research-informed defensive lesson here at Active Self-Protection. I am your host, as always, John Correa.
And I'm your co-host, Neil Widener.
MagTech is the only freedom seed I use on the range. I personally have over 100,000 rounds downrange of MagTech, and it's unbelievably reliable, very accurate, and a great value. Pick some up for your next range trip wherever you shop for range supplies. Johannesburg, South Africa, Assembly of God Church. Worship services are happening right now. The pastor is who is preaching. And it's going to end up in a scary armed robbery, not just an armed robbery, but actually a kidnapping, according to the news story that I've linked in the description. I want you to listen in on this. I thought about shortening it up by speeding some stuff up, but I really want you to think about how much time is involved here and how much terror these people are under the entire time.
Oh, yes, sir.
I looked for an update on this, could not find it, if they found the deacon or he was returned to his family or she. I have no idea. Obviously, when they took the pastor off camera for a minute, they made him go back to the room where they kept the money for the offering. They robbed everybody in the church, took every valuable that they could find, and kidnapped one of the deacons in this one. Hey, if you want to train and make your skill set better in a live fire environment, Neil Widener is the guy who runs our Active Self-Protection live training program.
Yeah, it's a good time. We travel around a few different places in the country. This year, we're going to 5 locations. If you want to see where that location is, hit the link, go to the Train With Us tab, and get in on the ASP Skills Summit is what we're calling it this time. It's a good time, a lot of fun time. You're going to get to put a lot of ammo down range, and hopefully learn something along the way.
First lesson here, Neil, is that this can literally happen anywhere. I know some people are like, well, that's just South Africa, and it doesn't happen here. Google armed robbery in church. I just did this morning, and 5 of them popped up in the United States. I saw one in Maine, one in Brooklyn, one in Missouri, another one in Arkansas, one in California. And so they came up really quickly for me. This kind of stuff can happen everywhere. And so I think church safety teams need to think about this and just at least kind of game it in their mind.
Yeah, I think that a lot of church safety teams practice the range stuff, the active shooter thing, and spending time through that with the medical response and communication and all that. And all of that is important and all of that needs to be done. But I think we're far more likely to see something like this. You're going to see something else in a church other than a shooting. And so to be prepared for these kind of things and be ready to react and do some mental reps. This one, while this is a tragedy and it broke my heart to hear those babies crying because knowing that nobody could get up and do anything to help them at the moment. But it really drives home the point that we need to be training for this stuff. We need to do the mental reps and we need to react when our gut tells us to react. And the first thing that caught my mind or my eye here, John, was the piano player, the guy behind the keyboard. He clocked this really early, even before the pastor did. And there was some opportunity there to do some reaction to fight back if that's the way that they would have chosen to go.
Totally agree. The keyboard player was definitely more on point than the pastor was. Of course, he's engaged and invested in preaching, right? So I did that for 14 and a half years. I was a vocational pastor, so I get it. You get immersed and enmeshed. At the same time, I carried a gun 13 of those 14 years. I started carrying a firearm after I started pastoring. So, for most of the time, I was armed and ready. And recognizing that and saying, okay, wait a minute, what would I do if is, I think, an important mental rep. And when these guys bust in, again, they're looking for money, they're looking for valuables, and apparently looking for one of the deacons. And you notice here, everything kind of like, what? And this is what you said earlier, Neil, is that the pastor, in Colonel Boyd's OODA loop, remember, not OODA, OODA is how Colonel Boyd says it. That idea is I have to observe what's happening, orient to it, then decide what to do and act. And it seems like they got stuck in what is happening here. And the keyboard player did a better job of that than the pastor of figuring out, oh, this is a robbery. I need to do something about it. So the faster I can accept reality and radically accept what's happening, the sooner I can get to the solving phase.
Yeah, the keyboard guy got to the A of the OODA loop much more quickly than the pastor. I think the pastor was caught off guard and understandably so. He doesn't expect that, he's not getting up on Sunday morning getting ready to go into preach and expect that somebody's going to rob them that day. So that's not, this isn't the fault of the pastor. But the keyboard guy, he reacted so much more quickly. He had a plan to hide his goods. He hid them there behind that little banner, it looked like. And then he laid down and he played camo and hide and seek, and he clearly never got found.
Yep, it's very true. Now, if the pastor had decided to act here and was armed, he's using a pulpit. So he has actually great camouflage for his draw. I think that the keyboard player has even better camouflage if he goes to get after these guys right now. And so, hey, pastor, hey, stage members, hey, band members, you have opportunities here and you get to camouflage your intentions as well. And if you put a couple of bullets in the first couple of them, 3, 4, 5, and beyond, we'll start to figure it out and go, oh, wait a minute, we got better things to do with our day than to continue this. Now, I get it. That also is predicated on them having some significant marksmanship skills. And instead, these guys just choose to get down. And what we see all the time, we saw this, Neil, in the West Freeway Church of Christ shooting, that people are really worried about people running back and forth into your line of fire. But what really happens when people brandish guns is exactly what we see from the stage here, is that they just get down. So if you recognize that as their default response and you instead stand and deliver, you can recognize, now I've got some opportunities here where I don't have a lot of cross, traffic.
Right. And you've got the opportunities if you've got the skills, and you only really get the skills if you go practice those. And if you're on a church safety team or any kind of even a school or anything like that, if you're armed in any of these kind of places, you need to understand and do a little bit of analytics on your specific building. What is the distance to the door? What's the distance to, the back corners and those kind of things? And then practice those shots. If this is something that you're going to engage in, you need to be able to do that, and you need to be able to do it quickly. And we've seen people do it quickly, and we've seen people end active shooters really quickly. And we've also seen some massive tragedies where nobody took the time to do anything. And in this case, John, you said you look to see. We don't know what happened to that deacon. I'm hoping somebody in the comments will tell us. But that's a horrible thing. And everybody there, they feel helpless, and yet they live in a place where they had the opportunity to be armed to stop something like this.
They do. Very difficult in South Africa for reasonable, decent people to get a hold of guns. Seemingly what we see here, though, of course, is that the perps are very easily able to get them. Church safety team, another thing for you to think about here is if your pastor's not part of your safety team, and kind of depending on your denomination, could be more or less likely, but you need to teach your pastor what to do if they are a compliant bystander, or if they're going to end up not being a part of your response team. What is the best thing for them to do? And you need to teach him or her exactly how to work that, because this pastor here just decides, okay, whatever you want, guys, I'm going to lay down. You can have whatever you want. And he goes fully compliant, face on the ground. And these folks do that here. And what we see in armed robberies like this, now, of course, there's a kidnapping piece to this too. But what we see in armed robberies in the United States is that about 25% of people who are fully compliant in armed robberies are nevertheless injured or even killed in those armed robberies. That number definitely goes down by about a factor of 4. So from 25% to 6% if they are armed themselves and get a shot in the fight. But compliance is a strategy. It's just one, Neil, where you're putting your safety in the hands of a felon.
Yeah, and that's never, that's not the plan. That's not what we want to do. We don't want to put our safety in somebody that we don't know. That's why we, John, like when you and I go someplace, I'll trust you with my life because we have that relationship. We've trained together. We know what's going on, and I don't think you're going to threaten me, so I'm not all that worried about it, right? But when it's somebody you don't know that is threatening you with a gun, you have to believe that they'll use it. You have to radically and rapidly accept that. That's something that Steph came up with a long time ago, and it just is true. You have to get into it quick. You've got to get through the OODA loop to the A to make the decision of what you're going to do, and then act, and then you have to be able to back it up.
Then you have to be able to back it up, which means. And I guess we are talking mostly, towards armed security, and not every church has that, right? So if your church security team decides, nope, we don't have anybody armed in church, or denomination doesn't allow that, or we have higher level control that doesn't allow that, or state doesn't allow that, hey, okay, then you got to make a plan when we're not armed. The bad guys aren't going to follow those rules. If your security team, on the other hand, is armed, what are you going to do, and what is your defensive plan, and how good are the people with guns? Because your buddy Bob may be great and may think, oh, okay, I'm part of an armed response with his little crappy LCP in his pocket, but he's not going to be able to hit his butt with both hands if you drew him a map from more than 3 yards. And so is he going to be able to make these kind of shots? I don't think so. Now, I also want to say here, Neil, they did take the pastor and make him go back and show them where the money was. And so there is this thing that churches do tend to pass the plate. And most churches are small in America, right? We're not talking about, a huge mega church, that's got thousands of people. We're talking about the average little congregation of 50 to 60 people. And those folks, they do tend to pass the plate. They might have a few $100 in cash on there, which is why a lot of churches don't even accept cash anymore. They just do everything online and use electronics and, electronic transfer, Zelle and PayPal and those things. But you got to have a plan for that, and who's taking care of the money, and if it's locked up, and why is that a target for people? Of course, I do think the bigger target is embezzlement and people being uncool with it that aren't robbers. But I think this is part of the planning process, Neil.
Yeah, I think you have to have a plan for where the money goes and how it is, protected. Now, in the case where you've got an armed guy with a revolver to your head telling you go get the money, even if it's in a safe, I would recommend you open the safe and give the money away. We're not protecting the things like the purses, the iPads, the phones that we're seeing them pick up, the cash. We're protecting life, and so we wait for opportunity to protect life, and then we act.
I really think that's important. Let that sink in. What Neil just told you, it's life we're protecting, and in this particular case, why would I argue so strongly that more church safety teams should have plans for something like this? And should have at least an armed component of somebody who's not only armed, willing, and present, but competent, highly competent, because this was a kidnapping. This was a deacon taken away from their family, from their congregation. This is shattering the safety and the security of an entire congregation forever, really. And instead, if you have competent armed resistance available in an area where people think that they don't have any resistance, then you can protect your congregation. Now listen, I wish we lived in a time and a place in the world where a church was a safe place. And I know kind of in our head, especially in America, we think of the sanctuary, we think of, worship services as kind of sacrosanct, and it's just not the case anymore. There's no such thing as, God's house being this place of peace where no one would ever think of doing violence. It's just not the way it is anymore. And because of that, we are the ones who have to make the plans to cover our asp.